Welcome to Interactive Storytelling. We are starting now the fourth set of videos which focuses on the designer. Once we have a platform for interactive storytelling, the designer's task is to create story worlds using it. The decisions made in the implementation naturally affect what the designer can do, but usually there are many possibilities to approach the design regardless of the platform. The main choice that the designer has to do is to choose the type of the story world. I've grouped the different types into three broader categories: linear story worlds, branching story worlds, and open story worlds. These will be the topics of the first three videos of this set. In the fourth and last video, I'll talk about the iterative design process that is essential for the designer. The story world types differ in how much control they give to the interactor. We can once again go back to the good old spectrum of interactivity. This time, however, let's draw it a bit differently. You may recall that we had an axis starting from conventional storytelling on the left-hand side and simulation on the right-hand side. Let's think about the designer's control. It's high when we are close to conventional storytelling, and it gets lower the further we move to the right. What about the interactor's freedom? It's at its lowest in conventional storytelling and gets higher the closer we get to simulation. There's nothing new here, you've already seen this several times during this course. This is basically the spectrum of interactivity, but drawn a bit differently. As the narrative paradox indicates, the designer's control over the story and the interactor's freedom exclude one another. Between the extremes, we have three different types of story world. Closest to the conventional storytelling are linear story worlds that I'll explain in this video. When we reduce the designer's control and increase interactor's freedom, we get branching story worlds. And if we continue to this direction, the third type we encounter is open story worlds. I'll come back to branching and open story worlds in the next videos. An obvious question at this point is whether these story world types are connected to the three approaches that we've seen previously. There is a connection, but it isn't a direct correspondence. I'll come back to this question once you've seen all the three story world types. So, let's start with linear story worlds. Linear narratives are typical in video games. The story progresses linearly through cutscenes between the levels or environmental changes. So, in the beginning, we have a cutscene setting up the story. Once the cutscene is over, the game begins and the player can start playing. At a convenient point, such as at the end of a level, the gameplay stops and the player gets to see the cutscene that takes the story further. Then the player can play again, until the next cutscene which halts the gameplay. And then the player can continue. And so on until in the end there's the final cutscene that ends the story. What happens here is that we do have both narrative and interaction, but the end result is not interactive narrative. They just follow one another in separate sections. Every player will encounter every time the same story in the same order. Although it might look that the player doesn't have any influence on the story can be woven into the level design so that the player's actions seem to affect the story as well. For example, the killing of a level boss can be followed by a cutscene where the allies of the boss get involved in the conflict. Although the killing of the boss was necessary for the player to proceed in the gameplay, now it seems to have repercussions in the story as well. This is called pseudo-agency, and I will talk about it more at a later point. Linear story world, however, doesn't have to be so straightforward as this. Let's take another quite typical linear story world used in a video game. An obvious improvement is to include side branches to the main linear story. Such an offshoot could be a quest, job, or task that the player can choose to undertake. This side step doesn't affect the main story, but the player simply diverges from the main story and then comes back. There could be several side branches offered to the player. The branch can be deeper and also offer branches of its own. Having side branches throughout the main story allows the player to make choices as they pick the side stories they wish. Still, in order to progress in the game, the player has to follow the linear main story to the end. Instead of one linear story, we can have several linear storylines that are braided together. Let's take an example. The events happen a long time. The events happen also in space. Imagine that we have one linear story taking place in one location. This could be an airport. The events continue in the same location, and they persist there until they move to another location, which could be, for example, a grocery store. And the events of this linear story stay there. Now we have a story happening over time in two places. Now let's take another story which starts in the grocery store. Next, the story takes us to the airport. What happens is that the second story combines with the first one. If in the first story a woman is waiting at the airport, the second story could start with a boy buying a chewing gum at the grocery store and forgetting his wallet on the counter. Without noticing that, he travels to the airport and meets his big sister, who is waiting there to see him off. Next, the second story goes back to the grocery store as the boy has realized that he forgot his wallet there. He talks to the clerk and tries to find his wallet. The story stays in the same location as the boy gets his wallet back. Now he can go back to the airport, but his sister is no longer there. She has got tired of waiting and has gone to the grocery store to find his brother, but he's already left. Now we have a structure that resembles something that we saw earlier, namely interactive television program that uses two channels, such as Mörderische Entscheidung. At each plot point, the interactor can swap from one storyline or one channel to another and choose which one to follow next. We don't have to limit on two linear stories. Let's take a third one. Now we have a story of a detective who is following the boy. In the beginning, he's in the same grocery store and sees the boy forgetting his wallet. He takes it, but in the meanwhile the boy has left the place and the detective has lost the track. Not knowing what to do, he goes to a nearby cafe to search the content of the wallet. He calls his supervisor, who instructs him to return the wallet back to the grocery store. When he gets there, he sees the boy, talks to him, and gives back the wallet. Knowing now where the boy is traveling, the detective returns to the cafe and reports again to his supervisor. But something prompts him to go back to the grocery store, where he sees the woman that is his actual target, and so forth. Why stop here? Let's have a fourth linear story. This story begins in the cafe, where a man is wondering what his niece has done with the packet he gave to her. So he decides to call her. Finding out that she's at the airport with her brother, the man decides to pay them a visit. Unfortunately, his nephew has left to fetch a forgotten wallet from the grocery store. Having talked with his niece, he feels relieved that the packet is now hidden in a forest and returns back to the cafe. Another man enters the cafe and sits nearby. It's impossible not to overhear the conversation he has on the phone. He's talking about the first man's nephew and the wallet. Then he says that he has an idea where to find his sister and stands up and leaves. Why was this man so interested in his nephew and niece, the first man thinks. Is he maybe trying to find the whereabouts of the packet? The man sits in the cafe and thinks about his next move. And so the story continues. How does the interactor make a decision in this story world? One way to think is to take the interactor as a ghost who can choose after a plot point which story to follow next. Another way is to imagine the story world as a house with windows and the interactor having the freedom to choose which window to look in. In this example, the interactor could choose either which of the 4 stories to follow next or which of the 3 locations to observe next. Whatever the realization might be, linear narratives are basically just conventional stories. They are presented to the interactor as they are, as the designer intended them to be. This means that it's relatively easy to prepare the necessary content, such as video clips or dialogue beforehand, and there isn't a need for generating new content on the fly. In the next video, we will take a step towards granting more real freedom to the interactor as we focus on branching story worlds. See you there.